على آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين اللهم اجعلنا منهم ومن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين ثم أما بعد. A few weeks ago when the news of the passing of Dr. Israr Ahmed came out, I received it by means of a text message, and maybe 10 minutes before that I had just finished listening to one of his lectures on tafsir of a surah, subhanallah. So I was completely overwhelmed when I heard the news, and I've been meaning to say something about him, something just in service to what he has done for me personally and for the Muslims in general. But I want to start my comments with something on the side, inshallah ta'ala, and that is that this ummah, one of its features is that we are merciful to each other. That's one of the main qualities this ummah has, that we are merciful to each other. But unfortunately, in our times, it's okay, it's just a kid, sorry. But in our times, unfortunately, especially to those who serve the religion, like the ulama, people are the least merciful to them. Hey you over there. Shh. He's going to do it again. Whose little guy is that? Stop him. Okay, mashallah. Jazakallah khair. He's awesome though. Okay, so anyhow. So we are the least merciful to our own ulama. And what ends up happening is, our ulama end up saying something that is not agreeable to everyone, or ends up saying something that you might even call controversial. And so what we do is, in return, we forget every good thing they may have done in their life, and we hold on to that one statement, that one quote, that one paragraph, whatever they may have said, and said, oh, you're talking about that guy who did this, and because of this they may be kafir or deviant or this, or calling people to the hellfire. All kinds of filthy names will be called. And so many ulama have been demonized because of this. So many ulama in our history have been demonized by Muslims themselves. The ummah that is supposed to be known for mercy among each other is the most vicious to each other. And imagine if this person, whoever he may have been, and this is not about Dr. Israr Ahmed in particular, whoever he may have been, if he is, he's awesome. It's alright. He's enjoying the speech. Okay. You know, if that person is close to Allah and their work was acceptable to Allah, and Allah forgave whatever mistake they made, they said something in a speech or something and it was a mistake and Allah forgave it, and Allah accepted all the good deeds that they did, imagine that you and I are hounding on this person and cursing them and publicly ridiculing them, and on the other hand Allah has forgiven him. Where do we stand with Allah Azza wa Jal? Subhanallah. That he may be counted from the awliya of Allah. We don't know. So this is something we have to be, Muslims themselves have to be very careful about. And what I've noticed, and you may differ with me, but what I've noticed is the people of knowledge, the actual scholars, are very respectful. And the people that are gangsters in the cloaks of scholars, they really are. They're mobsters, they have their mafia, they have their crowds, and they're trying to hold on to their territory. That's all it is. It's just in the name of religion. That's the only difference. Otherwise, it's no different than the mafia. These are the people that create these kinds of problems. And we should ignore that kind of rhetoric and not even respond to it. We should just ignore it as Muslims generally. Anyhow, when it comes to the work of the late Dr. Israr Ahmed, rahimahullah, he's known for predominantly two things. There's his political activism and his political thought, and then there is his Quranic work. And I'm going to dedicate this conversation, inshallah ta'ala, to his Quran-related work, inshallah. At maybe some other time we can talk about his political thought. But I think the more relevant and the more universal contribution he has to offer is his Quranic service, the service to the study of Quran that he provided. As an introduction to it, I will tell you that his study of Quran and his education of the Quran for the Muslims was divided into three parts. So you have to organize your thoughts about this man and his ideas. It's three things you have to try and remember, inshallah ta'ala. The first of them is the education of the Quran for the vast majority or the masses of Muslims. There has to be some kind of a program where all Muslims are educated about what the Quran is, what it has to say, what its message is. They have to have at least a bare minimal knowledge of the language of the Quran, so when they are standing in salah and the Quran is being recited, they know what it has to say. They identify with this book and it gives them a sense of identity. That was the first purpose and the first part of his movement. To achieve this goal, he basically engaged in two major projects. The first project is called Dawra Tarjuma Quran in Urdu, Dawra Tarjuma Quran. And this was, you know how masajid all over the world, have the Taraweeh prayer during Ramadan, and people are feeling a spirit of connection with the Quran, and the average Muslim reads more Quran in that month than any other time. So he saw that as a strategic opportunity. Why not do a dars, a lecture series on the entire Quran, ayah by ayah, even if in brief translation, during that month. So for example, in Lahore where he started this, there would be 20 Taraweeh, 20 Taraweeh of prayer, and one juz is recited or a little more. After every 4 rak'ah, he'll give a dars on everything that was recited. And then a dars, then 4 more rak'ah, and then more dars and 4 more rak'ah. So they would do 20 rak'ah of Taraweeh, and then actually go through the entire Quran in translation with brief explanation where necessary, but keep flowing. This wasn't giving a lot of detail to every ayah or a lot of depth, but at least Muslims have an overview of what the Quran says, number one. And the second benefit of this project, which is huge, is that most of us, especially even the versed or seasoned students of Quran, when we study the Quran, we study 1 ayah at a time. We study 2 ayat at a time. We study very small chunks of Quran at a time, or even a subject at a time. For example, the subject of women in the Quran, or the subject of taqwa in the Quran, or the subject of death in the Quran. So what we do is we take one subject or 1 ayah or one small piece and focus in on that. But this approach that he had, you know what it does? It gives you a taste of the Quran as a conversation, Allah speaking. Because instead of stopping at an ayah, you read the ayah and you read the ayah right after and right after and right after, and what happens is you get a sense of a flow of conversation. And a lot of times, even in translation, you will not get a taste and appreciation of the Quran as dialogue, as conversation, as you will in that program. And actually the first time I was properly introduced to the Quran was through that program, and I felt really like it was a conversation between Allah and human beings. It feels like that. And that's what salah is supposed to feel like, by the way. Salah, the purpose of salah is we feel like Allah is conversing with us by means of His words. But because the vast majority of Muslims don't understand the Arabic language and don't understand the language of the Quran, this was His way of compensating. That was the idea. If we can't connect to Allah with the Quran in the salah, at least translate it and connect. The next best thing was his idea, right? So that was the first project that he started every Ramadan, and he did it tirelessly. Incidentally, I tried to do it once, like 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago in Muslim Center in Flushing. And I swear to you, I don't know how the man did it. I have no idea. I would study 8-9 hours a day and give 3.5-4 hours of lecture that night, and I would be exhausted. And he did this for 20-30 years straight without a break. Without a break, subhanAllah. I'm just baffled at how he did it every single Ramadan. I did it then and I said, man, I made this commitment, I'm going to finish it. I couldn't even stand up straight like by the end of like the 20th day of Ramadan. And at the end of it I said, I'm not doing this again. Forget it. If I do it, I'll spread it over 10 years. Right? SubhanAllah. So that's one of his great contributions. The second, this is also part of mass education for Muslims, was okay, if Muslims are not going to make the time to study the entire Quran, at least they should study about 1/10 of the Quran in depth, or a little more in depth. So he made a course. In Urdu it's called Muntakhab Nisab. It's about 70 hours of lecture in Urdu. Actually, in 44 hours of lecture in Urdu, 70 hours in English, because he spoke slower in English, right? Rahimahullah. And he took about 2.5 to 3 juz of selections from the Quran. And he said, if you study these selections properly, the purpose of them is it will give you basically a scheme, a framework of all of the subjects in the Quran. All of the subjects in the Quran. And it was based on a simple philosophy that the summary of the entire Quran rests inside Surah Al-Asr. That every piece, the first ayah, the second ayah, the third ayah, especially the third ayah of Surah Al-Asr, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. You all know this. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. That the Quran either deals with Iman, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, or it deals with righteous deeds, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, or it deals with enjoining the truth, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, or enjoining perseverance, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Based on that understanding, he devised an entire curriculum, which was a continuation of a curriculum that was made even before him by a scholar by the name of Amin Ahsan Islahi. Rahimahullah, he developed that curriculum first, and it was enhanced and added to by Dr. Israr Ahmed. Amin Ahsan Islahi, by the way, rahimahullah, was one of the great influences on Dr. Israr Ahmed. Though he disagreed with him on a number of things, you will notice if you are a continuous listener of Dr. Saab, that he will mention Amin Ahsan Islahi rahimahullah quite a bit. And he was very influenced by his tafsir, Tadabbur al-Quran, and he had a lot of personal interactions with him as well before he passed away. Anyhow, so this is his first thing, educating the average Muslim with the Quran. The only additional thing I will tell you about that is his theory was that there has to be mass education of at least basic Quranic education and Arabic in the entire Muslim world. All Muslims have an obligation to learn Arabic as best as they can. This is the language of Allah's book. It should be part of minimal education. Like, in the public or secular world, we say at least get a GED or at least graduate from high school. Well, his idea was at least know some Quran and at least know Arabic. At least know that much. That much education every single Muslim should have. That was his theory. And that's again mass education. Now we go to his second layer of service. You can call this Tadabbur al-Quran. A deep reflection on the Quran. A deep, thorough study of the Quran. He developed this thought and started acting on it more seriously in the early 80s. And he decided to commit himself to a series of durus where he would study maybe 20 tafsirs of the scholars, take his own notes,